Hi, I'm Sean, and I'm going to talk about the spine and the general anatomy of it without getting into a lot of details about the particular afferent and efferent tracts at this point. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about the general anatomy of it. So on the left here, we see a longitudinal image um, of the spine and of the paravertebral ganglia. So this is the medulla oblongata here, and this is the cervical section of the spine, which is the upper part. The medulla oblongata is like on the lower part of the brain. It's part of the brainstem. Above it is the pons, and then above that is the midbrain, and then above that is the thalamus, and then above that is the cerebral cortex, the cerebrum. So this is the cervical area, this is the thoracic region, this is the lumbar region, the sacral region, and then the coccygeal region of the spine. Now the spine is just entirely made up of neurons and glial cells, mostly probably oligodendrocytes, but I imagine there's other kinds of neuroglial cells in there. But basically the important thing is that it's mostly composed of neurons that are sending information from one point to another. And the primary role of the spine is to communicate information from our brain down to our body in different, whatever place it is, and also to communicate information from our body back up to our brain. There is some autonomy in the spine as well that allows our spine to tell muscles what to do periodically with a pattern. And so we have central pattern generators actually also in the spine that allow even locomotion without using the brain even. And I guess they did experiments in cats that were pretty cruel, I think, because they killed them. But they did learn, though, that the spine actually allows us to even walk for a while at least without the brain even. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on here in the gray matter, which I'll talk a little bit more, which houses cell bodies and synapses that leave or from afferent information that goes in, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So there's a total of 31. So I said 8. Well, this is cervical, this is 8, this is 12, this is 5, and 1. So that's 20, 30, and 31. So that's how many spinal nerves exit on each side. So it's actually a total of 62 spinal nerves. These orange segments that I just told you about earlier are called the paravertebral ganglion or the sympathetic chain ganglia. And these regions are part of the sympathetic nervous system, that not just the adrenaline that goes through your blood, but also the actual targeted communication with certain parts of your body. That occurs, this is actually a synapse point between the pre-ganglionic sympathetic neurons and the post-sympathetic, the sympathetic post-ganglionic neurons that actually go to your target organs. So this at the bottom here, and this is actually at about maybe L2 or L3 in the spine, somewhere in the lumbar region. Actually, that's where your spine actually ends. It ends before the end of your vertebra. And then, so this is called the conus medullaris, and then below that, this is the filum terminale that connects down to your coccyx here. And these branching spinal nerves reach their whatever vertebra they correspond to down in your the lower half of your lumbar, and then all your sacral and your coccygeal vertebra, where the actual spinal nerves exit. That's where these go. This is called the caudal equina, this fanning of spinal nerves. So that's kind of a summary of the spine. So these technically are not part of the central nervous system. The central nervous system actually just encompasses the spine and the brain. but I'm just talking about these because it's part of our sympathetic autonomic nervous system. So moving on, this is that we've changed perspectives. Now we're looking down and from the front kind of a human, and looking at the spine. And we cut the spine like on the transverse plane, the axial plane. So we're looking at this part is the dorsal or posterior part of the spine. This is the ventral part here. And some prominent features here would be this and this, which are kind of like in your brain you have the longitudinal fissure, which divides your two hemispheres, and it goes deep in. And you actually have medial cortex too, because it goes all the way down to the thalamus, or actually, yeah, down to the thalamus. So that's kind of like this part here, except this is in the ventral aspect of the spine. It goes all the way down, almost all the way down to the central canal, which houses your cerebrospinal fluid. And this is the ventral median fissure, and this is the dorsal medial sulcus. So this is shallower than this, and in our brain, the sulci are kind of little infoldings of the cerebral cortex, whereas fissures are larger trends of change, like your Sylvian fissure which is also called the lateral sulcus, is a larger like transverse region where the brain keeps going and then finally goes around, or like I said, the two hemispheres are divided by the fissure. So that's why we call this a fissure here, the ventral median fissure and the dorsal medial sulcus. So this is white matter and this is gray matter. The white matter is comprised of ascending and descending tracts. So the ascending tracts can be called columns, but they can also be called tracts. The descending axons of neurons that are myelinated, also the ascending tracts can be myelinated too, but we call those tracts. So it has those two kinds of fibers, but it also has fibers that connect one area of gray matter to like another area of gray matter, for example, at a different level. So if we're looking down, maybe there's a connection between one part of the gray matter and a higher part of the gray matter. Those kinds of neurons also exist in the white matter. And then there's also commissural fibers that connect both hemispheres of the spine as well, transverse commissural fibers that might coordinate the left and right sides of the body somehow, to tell one side that it's going to do this to the other side, for example. And these could also be not just transverse, but maybe also in the longitudinal plane as well. And they decussate. Okay, so this green, so actually with the white matter, also we have somatotopy, which means that the actual position of these fibers that are on the transverse or on the axial, the longitudinal axis, their position, lateral to medial, also is related to which part of the on the longitudinal axis, which part of the body those connect to. So, for example, in your ascending columns for sensory information, afferent information that goes up to the brain, those fibers, if they're coming from your leg, they're going to be more on the inside because they went into the spine first. And then later, some of your sensory information from say your arms also went in after that, and those are external, whereas your lower limb information was already there, so it's on the inside. So outside to inside is kind of like lower body to higher body, or lower limb to upper limb. So, and then also for descending fibers, there is a somatotopy, but it's reversed. and I think I know why. So for fibers that are coming down to command muscles after they go to the gray matter to tell the lower motor neuron to communicate with the muscle, those fibers have somatotopy as well, but say one from the brain to the leg, for example, the upper motor neuron is going to be towards the outside, and then ones for like the arms are going to be more towards the inside. And the reason probably is because they have to go to the gray matter first, and then synapse with neurons that, like the lower motor neurons or other neurons that eventually communicate with the lower motor neuron. So they have to go to the gray matter first, so they're going to want to be on the inside. The amount inside that they are is going to be respective to how superior they are in our longitudinal axis, basically. So I said all that to say that this whole area is pretty well organized, and it knows where it's going, and they're organized the way they're supposed to be. So there's a lot of order here. With the gray matter, this is cell bodies and interneurons that are connecting different neurons to each other. You have the upper motor neurons that are like up in your medulla up here, or that basically come down, and they go down to whatever part, and then they go to the gray matter, and in the middle, they synapse with the lower motor neuron, and then they go out. Well, they don't just necessarily synapse directly. In fact, it's actually rare for an upper motor neuron to synapse directly with a lower motor neuron. Usually they're synapsing with other interneurons, and like I was talking about the central pattern generators, they're synapsing with other hardwired information that's absolutely crucial to our basic coordination of movement here in this area in the gray matter. So also, the gray matter also has an organization to it. So remember I said this was the dorsal part, this is the ventral part. So the dorsal part is more concerned with sensory information, afferent information. So this green area, these green neurons that are coming up and going in, those synapse in the dorsal horn. And when they do, they might communicate with another area of the gray matter for like a synapse, or for a reflex, and then go back, directly back, and then tell your muscle to move and change. So even before you have to think about it, or other higher processing centers in the reticular formation, or other areas like even, I don't know, like even in the primary motor cortex or the basal ganglia, you have to even get the information. You already are going to start moving a muscle like away from a stimulus if it's causing pain or something, or it's very strong. Or if, say, a muscle starts to stretch more than it's supposed to, that might mean that that muscle's failing under some kind of pressure or force, and you have to immediately compensate for that. And then so it has to actually have a loop that goes back and first inhibits the antagonistic muscle, and also promotes the muscle that's actually being stretched more in a reflex. And I can maybe talk a little bit more about that in a different video. So that uses muscle spindles. So moving on. So this is the sensory part, the somatosensory area. Then this area here is the visceral sensory area, which is also in the lateral horns here. So this is somatic, this is autonomic, the lateral horns are autonomic, but it keeps the same pattern of having the dorsal part be concerned with sensory, and the ventral part being concerned with motor. So it goes afferent somatic, afferent somatic, afferent visceral, and efferent somatic is the pattern here. So this area is concerned with our autonomic processes. So moving on down to the somatic area here, this is somatomotor, and so that's where our information comes down from our brain, synapses in the gray matter, and then tells our lower motor neurons indirectly what to do. That's this part of the gray matter here. So, and also there's also a pattern laterally to medially. So the medial areas tend to be more concerned with like body posture and balance, movements that we need to make to correct where our body is and where we're leaning and stuff like that. Or even the muscles that control just the crude movement of a limb. So like this kind of movement versus like this kind of movement, or even the movement of like my wrist isn't necessarily in the medial part. It's going to be more like my shoulders, like the way that we can shift our weight right away, versus delicate movements. The delicate, controlled, fine motor movements are going to be more on the lateral parts of the gray matter in the ventral part here. So that's kind of how that's laid out. You have vestibular nuclei and the reticular formation up in your medulla here, and even parts of your midbrain and your pons that can coordinate your balance kind of movement and make a correction, like including your cerebellum, for example. And a lot of the at least the parts coming from the reticular formation and your vestibular nuclei are going to the medial parts to correct your movement. They can also, like I said, control your limbs and make your hands go out to like stop you from falling and stuff like that, without you even having to process it or think about it, using probably your frontal part of the brain, your prefrontal cortex, and then telling your primary motor cortex what to do. So it's pretty cool. It's really amazing. So I want to look a little bit at this part here. So you have these nerves that are leaving at each level of the spine. Well, each nerve contains both afferent and efferent information for both somatic and for autonomic processes. So in this scheme here, I showed blue on the inside, like kind of a bluer color for this is actually going this direction. It's sensory, visceral sensory information. And this part here is your afferent sympathetic information, or actually I shouldn't say just sympathetic, autonomic information that's going out. The motor is going from the gray matter and then coming out. And then the green is your somatic sensory information, and the red is your somatomotor information that you're consciously willing, or maybe that's also correcting your movements that you don't know about. But it's actually controlling skeletal muscle. The red is controlling skeletal muscle. The orange is controlling only smooth muscles, or maybe other neurons that control smooth muscles eventually. And also the blue is sensing maybe the stretch of your smooth muscles, like in your bladder or something. That's sending information back up. So this area is the spinal root, the dorsal root ganglion, which contains the cell bodies of your sensory neurons. Your sensory neurons are actually pseudo-unipolar or unipolar, and they look like this. This is the cell body, and this is the two processes on it. So right here, for example, actually, I made a mistake when I did this. It should go like this. Since they're going, this is afferent information. It's actually going from your periphery up to your central nervous system. But you notice it starts here, it goes through. It doesn't care about where the cell body is, it just keeps going. Whereas multipolar starts at the soma, the actual cell body where the nucleus is. It's triggered by the dendrites and causes an action potential, and then it goes all the way down the axon. So I say that to say that these neurons are different. These green ones are different. They actually have their cell bodies here in the middle of the neuron. So you have information coming in, and it just keeps going past the cell body. Whereas these, the red ones, you actually have the cell body in here that's synapsing with the upper motor neuron, and then going and following the red down and going into going down the axon down to your actual muscles. So this is the dorsal root ganglion. This here is the circle here is supposed to be these little circles here. So this is the sympathetic chain ganglion. This is a single ganglion, I guess. So you have this visceral information going out to tell smooth muscle what to do, or some other neurons that control smooth muscle indirectly. It goes through this axon here and then goes into the sympathetic ganglion. This part right here is the white ramus communicans, or plural it's the ramus. The gray rami communicantes goes in to the paravertebral ganglion here, synapses with the postsynaptic sympathetic neuron, and then that postsympathetic neuron goes down to the whatever end target is, whether it's the cardiac plexus, the celiac ganglia, or the superior or inferior mesenteric nuclei or plexi, and or the medulla, the adrenal medulla. So yeah, that's what happens. Sometimes they don't synapse here; they go down, like they might. So say the visceromotor neuron, the presynaptic, preganglionic sympathetic neuron might go in, and it may go down to a different level and synapse with the neuron, or it may go down to a different level and then come out and then go to a plexi or plexus. There's all kinds of ways that they can connect to other neurons. Some of them go down to, like down here to the prevertebral ganglia here, that are more concerned with your digestive tract or your bladder or other functions down there. And they don't even have to synapse right away. And then they synapse with the postganglionic sympathetic neuron down there. They use acetylcholine instead for their signaling, whereas the other, like the upper motor neurons with the lower motor neurons for the somatic tracts that control our skeletal muscles, those use glutamate, but the actual lower motor neuron uses acetylcholine. So some differences there between the two. There's also the parasympathetic nervous system, which also has its cell bodies in this region as well, but they don't synapse in the, at least not that I'm aware of, they don't synapse in the sympathetic chain ganglia here. They actually just usually go directly out to their target, and they go close to their target. The preganglionic parasympathetic neurons synapse in ganglia that are close to their target organs, whereas generally the sympathetic the sympathetic preganglionic neurons go just a short distance and synapse with the postganglionic sympathetic neurons at a distance from their target organs. And they also have, the sympathetic nervous system has more neurons that can connect to a postganglionic sympathetic neuron, versus the parasympathetic is more one neuron with another neuron. So there's more calculations probably going on with the sympathetic nervous system, which is interesting to me because the sympathetic nervous system also seems to control like the whole body at one time, because of your adrenaline that goes to the blood. But it's not actually a dichotomy functionally. Like sometimes your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system are doing different processes at the same time in different areas. It doesn't just mean that one's on and the other one's off at any given time. They're also calculated in what they're doing. So anyway, moving back to this part here. This is the sympathetic chain ganglion, efferent, afferent, unipolar, multipolar. For the actual unipolar, I wonder at least if, so this is where the cell body would be like right here. I wonder if the reason that it's here is it's adaptive to actually have it further away from the periphery, because this is where the DNA is, and the parts of the, where that's where your genes are, that's where transcription is taking place, and where at least your primary, a lot of your endoplasmic reticulum is, even though there's actually also endoplasmic reticulum probably in other parts, at least in your brain and your dendritic spines. You also have endoplasmic reticulum up there that releases calcium locally and can probably contribute to long-term potentiation. But what I'm saying here basically is, say you have a virus that infects your neuron, it has to get all the way up into the part by your spine instead of right at the periphery before it can actually infect your cell and actually control the nucleus at least. Also, if damage occurs to your sensory neuron, if you damage, say, the terminal part here, Wallian degradation might occur, but eventually it'll try to build its way back, which is a ways away from the nucleus, but at least you don't damage the actual nucleus, the actual soma of your cell, because it's close to the actual spine. Also, I wanted to point out one more thing that was adaptive here, and that is that your sensory information is on the dorsal aspect, which is in the back, whereas your motor information is more in the ventral part. So it's probably more important to be able to move your body than to be able to sense something, because we have a brain that allows us to have at least sensory information from our eyes and our ears to actually respond to something, even if we can't actually feel it through our somatosensory system. So this part is tucked away in the middle of our body that controls our actual limbs, and this part here is the most exposed part probably, and which is our conscious sensation of it. The autonomic part is tucked away here, which you would expect, at least you'd expect it to not be that close to the back of the spine. So that's all I can think of right now. Thanks for watching this video, and like this if you like it.